It's a brand new week. Hello and welcome to A News. My name is Asim coming to you live from Baku in Azerbaijan. Let's see the headlines. The U.S. is launching what it calls an economic D-Day against Iran as Tehran threatens to halt all oil exports from the Gulf. Oil prices are falling ahead of Washington's announcement of sweeping new sanctions on Iran. And Syria and Israel have held U.S.-mediated talks in Jordan, seeking to de-escalate tensions after recent Israeli strikes. All right, we begin here this morning. The United States and Iran have exchanged new threats as Washington prepares to announce what it calls the largest financial pressure campaign ever imposed on Tehran.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is expected to unveil additional economic sanctions targeting Iran and countries that continue trading with it later today. The measures come as Iran warns it could halt all oil exports from the Gulf if what it calls an economic war continues. Iranian official Mohsen Rezai said Tehran would not allow a single drop of oil to be exported through the Strait of Hormuz or anywhere in the Persian Gulf if economic pressure increases. He also warned that countries supporting U.S. sanctions could be viewed as participating in an act of war. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi dismissed the threat of the new measures, calling them a sign of desperation. He described them as a continuation of what he called Washington's maximum pressure policy and urged the United States to pursue dialogue instead. This is a repetitive scenario, from the crippling sanctions imposed during the Obama administration to the maximum pressure campaign during Mr. Trump's first administration, and now to the latest sanctions. All of these measures have been introduced under different titles, but they represent the same kind of bullying that we have always seen in American policy. Meanwhile, Iran's state-controlled Persian Gulf Strait Authority has warned that vessels accused of violating its transit rules in the Strait of Hormuz could face penalties, including fines, detention, or confiscation. Fewer than 20 commodity vessels transited the narrow waterway over the weekend, according to shipping data, as Iranian and U.S. restrictions continue to limit traffic through the key energy route. It remains one of the world's most important oil transit corridors, with at least 20% to 25% of global energy shipments passing through it. The latest developments come as Tehran and Washington remain locked in a broader confrontation, with diplomatic efforts showing little progress.
Meanwhile, Iran says its defense production has doubled over the past year, with output of some strategic military equipment rising even further. The figures were announced by Defense Ministry on Friday, saying that the output of some strategic military products had risen more than threefold since the war began in late February. They added that the increase came despite parts of Iran's defense industry being targeted during last year's 12-day conflict with Israel. Pakistan's Army Chief General Asim Munir will visit Tehran on Monday as part of efforts to promote peace and security in the region. Pakistan is currently mediating talks between Iran and the United States aimed at ending the war. Munir is expected to discuss the peace process and possible new U.S. sanctions on Iran. The visit comes as Tehran warns it could respond militarily. Washington says it's preparing what it calls the toughest sanctions in history. Meanwhile, all shipments through the Strait of Hormuz have also come to a standstill as Tehran threatens to strike tankers attempting to pass through without authorization. British Prime Minister Andy Burnham is set to visit Kyiv on Monday. It's his first foreign trip since taking office, reaffirming the UK support for Ukraine as the country marks 35 years of independence. Burnham will meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and chair his first meeting of the coalition of the willing, focused on supporting Kyiv. The UK is also expected to allow Ukraine access to technical information on British components used in Storm Shadow missiles, potentially helping Kyiv develop its own version of the long-range weapon. The visit comes as Russia warns of consequences over British-made drones used on strikes on Russian territory.
Through the logjams, and
Now, President Zelensky says Ukraine will not pursue an alternative to NATO membership as it seeks firm security guarantees. He said on Sunday that joining the security alliance would give Kyiv greater access to funding and defense cooperation. He said Ukraine needs 30 billion euros in EU loans this year to cover the budget shortfall, as well as $27 billion for defense. The Ukrainian president said the diplomatic window to end the war would last until next summer. But Russia remains unwilling while Kyiv holds the Donbas. The Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines were damaged by explosions in the Baltic Sea in September 2022. The pipelines were designed to carry Russian gas directly to Germany. The blast prompted an international investigation into who is responsible. 2 Ukrainian nationals are currently in custody over suspected involvement in the explosions. Kyiv has denied any role in the attack. Speaking after the Baltic Nordic summit in Kyiv on Sunday, President Zelensky said Ukraine was not involved in any operation targeting the pipelines.
Ukraine has never officially taken part in any operations regarding the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The issue is not whether someone wants something or not. There is an investigation, and it is currently underway.
Ukrainian President Zelensky met Nordic and Baltic leaders in Kyiv on Sunday as the country marked National Flag Day. Leaders from Denmark, Finland, Latvia and Lithuania joined the ceremony, with officials from other Nordic and Baltic countries also visiting the capital. The leaders are due to hold talks with Zelensky as important decisions and announcements are expected. Drone debris hit a private childcare center in Russia's city of Krasnodar. 2 children were killed and 9 others were injured. The attack also sparked a major fire at an Ozon logistics hub in the city. For the latest in the
A drone attack in Makhachkala, Dagestan has triggered a fire at Russia's online retailer Ozon's logistics hub. The company said it had also temporarily suspended operations at 2 warehouses in the nearby regions of Stavropol and Adygea amid a drone attack alert. Ozon said the facilities were not damaged. Meanwhile, debris from a drone attack has hit a private childcare center in Russia's southern city of Krasnodar, killing 2 children. 9 other people were injured, including 7 youngsters. Regional Governor Veniamin Kondratyev said the incident happened overnight. Debris also fell on residential buildings while fires broke out at warehouses in the city, including at Russia's online retailer Ozon at its logistics hub. The company said that operations have been suspended. In Russia's Stavropol region, a drone attack on an industrial area in the city of Nevinomysk was repelled, according to Regional Governor Vladimir Vladimirov. Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, a Russian attack on the outskirts of Kyiv killed 3 people, according to the regional governor. Russian President Vladimir Putin has described Ukraine's strikes on Russian economic targets as the opening of Pandora's box. He said Moscow would respond by targeting Ukraine's most sensitive economic sectors. The comment comes as Ukraine steps up its attacks on logistics hubs and warehouses across Russia, targeting infrastructure it says supports Moscow's war effort. Meanwhile, Kyiv seeks additional air defense interceptor missiles from the United States and Europe to strengthen its air defense capabilities. On Monday, Russia's defense ministry said that it had launched a Soyuz rocket carrying a spacecraft for defense purposes. According to the ministry, the Soyuz 2.1B rocket lifted off from the Plesetsk cosmodrome in northern Russia. The ministry did not provide further details about the spacecraft or its mission.
Now, for the latest in the Russia-Ukraine war, I'm joined by Endrich Dobrinsky, a policy expert at the U.S.-Ukraine Center for Relations in Kyiv, Ukraine. Hello and welcome to A News.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for having me on Ukraine's Independence Day.
Great. So Ukraine is marking those 35 years of independence you're speaking of today, but it is doing so in the middle of its 4th year of this full-scale war, with Russia intensifying attacks and Kyiv also urgently asking its allies for more air defense and security guarantees. What does Ukraine's position today tell us about where this war is actually heading?
Well, when we're looking at the numbers, and you mentioned some great ones in your reporting package before this about the escalating number of civilian casualties, we see that happening specifically in the month of June and July on Ukrainian territory, where we haven't seen the amount of civilian casualties that we saw in those 2 months that we yes, for instance, with the Ukrainian children being killed or injured at a rate that they haven't since the first month of the full-fledged war back in March and April of 2022. We also see targeting of Ukraine's grain exports, which is a very important commodity for the rest of the world and could endanger economic markets, given that Russia continues to make the Black Sea its weapon of choice. On the other side, we do see Ukraine increasing its pull and influence, targeting areas far deeper into Russia than Russia has any defensive capabilities of preventing this from. So we do know that not only are Russian soldiers dying or being eliminated from the battlefield at a rate of over 40,000 in the last month alone, but we also know that their logistics centers and hubs, especially their oil producing and refining capabilities, have reduced dramatically. All of this is to say that the pressure is being put on so that there is an end to this conflict, because nobody wants to see this come to the 5th year of war, which it would do in February of 2027.
We know that Ukraine, as I alluded to earlier on, is seeking funding from its allies. So military and otherwise, would you say Ukraine is holding its position, or is Russia beginning to regain momentum even though it is getting hit by Ukraine?
Well, the problem for Russia is that it is the largest country in the world, and therefore it will never have enough interceptors for all of the drones that Ukraine is firing. It is estimated that by the end of this year, by the end of 2026, Ukraine's domestically produced ballistic offensive rockets will be targeting and hitting locations within Russia. Also another reason for Russia to come to the table, which they have so far refused to do. As far as what Ukraine can do and what's happening with Russia on the battlefield, again, I mentioned over 40,000 Russian casualties in the month of July alone. That is not something that's sustainable for a country like Russia. They are not recruiting enough people to make up that difference. And if they want to continue doing the war, the only thing that they're harming is themselves. As you mentioned, the international allies are in Kyiv today. There will be a special session of the United Nations Security Council today to talk about Russia's increased attacks. And in the meantime, the pressure is building to have Putin sit across the table, which is something that he has refused to do since December of 2019.
So President Zelensky says Russia could then mobilize as many as 300,000 additional troops after its September elections. How seriously should Ukraine and its allies take that warning when they meet?
Oh, absolutely. This is something that's being anticipated. This mobilization has been talked about all year. For political reasons, they've delayed it until after the elections. But in the end, as I mentioned, you cannot have an army that loses over 40,000 soldiers through deaths or wounded on a monthly basis and continue going. Russia has already surpassed their losses in conflicts such as Afghanistan and others during the Soviet Union times. This being the first mobilized conflict that Russia has had without Ukrainian soldiers for the last 8 centuries is something that is seriously problematic for Russia. They aren't able to go forward because they are fighting an army that knows exactly what their fighting techniques are, and they're constantly innovating. So I mentioned the fact that Ukraine's drones are hitting deeper and deeper into Russia, but I also mentioned the fact that their ballistic capabilities are going to be such that by the end of 2026, Ukraine not only attack Ukraine on a daily basis, as I see here in Kyiv, where I sit today, but also cross over into NATO territory, where they crossed over into Poland 3 weeks ago and left a 10-meter crater in the middle of a Polish field.
All right, so we have spoken about how Ukraine has warned of serious shortages of air defense interceptors. Is this becoming one of Kyiv's most immediate vulnerabilities, and what other vulnerabilities can be expressed with their UK counterparts in that meeting?
Yeah, I can specifically cite President Zelensky speaking earlier this month when he gathered all of Ukraine's ambassadors for a summit in Kyiv. One of the high points or main priorities that he labeled to each ambassador, as well as their embassy throughout the world, is the identification and sourcing of interceptor missiles. Although these are produced for the most part in the United States, although Germany and Japan have licenses for these, and Ukraine is hoping to have that same kind of license, they are spread out all over the world. And it is those Patriot interceptors that are most sought after, because the United States, as we all know, is involved in a war in Iran. It is using those interceptor missiles to defend its own locations. So Ukraine right now is looking all over the world to see where it can source Patriot batteries that have been purchased by other countries, which are at this point not being used. Most of those countries aren't in an active conflict. And if those Patriot batteries can come to Ukraine before the end of the year, that would help Ukraine survive this upcoming attack. As you mentioned, the mobilization by Russia, but also an increased attack on Ukrainian civilian points, as Russia has been targeting every year, especially during the winter, to knock out power and water during those difficult months.
So the U.S., we know, is busy with the conflict with Iran. We know that they also have midterm elections that are coming up. So as Zelensky meets with his UK counterparts, then what concrete commitments should we be looking for coming from this meeting? We know, as I've said earlier on, that they need air defenses, but what stronger action can be taken to end this war?
A number of things. One, it's not just the air interceptors, but those are a priority for everybody to source right now. It is just a reality that Russia has increased the amount of ballistic missiles onto the domestic civilian sites, such as a children's hospital earlier this week, such as multiple apartment buildings. As you drive through Kyiv, every visitor to Ukraine, including those 6 world leaders, including former Vice President Mike Pence, as well as the UK Prime Minister who's coming, we will all see that when we drive through Kyiv and see the areas that ballistic missiles are attacking. But what can Europe do? It is about supporting Ukraine during this time. It is about making sure that Ukraine and Europe and its international partners are on the same page. Because when there is a final agreement, and there will be an agreement made to end this war, it is important that it is backed up by other countries. This is not enough for just Russia and Ukraine to have an agreement, because Russia violated 9 bilateral agreements with Ukraine when they invaded. So it's very important that the rest of the world buy into this. And that means not just buying into holding the peace, but prosecuting those who made this war crime happen, including the over 20,000 children that were stolen, including the events of sexual violence against innocent people when Russian soldiers invaded Ukraine. So there are many parts of making peace, And one of those begins with diplomatic relations, strengthening diplomatic relations, and talking through an entire slew of things that need to happen for peace to hold.
Now, could expanding Ukraine's ability to produce its own weapons fundamentally change the dynamics of the war?
Yes, we saw this specifically between last year and this year. The Center of U.S.-Ukrainian Relations, which I represent, sponsors a summit every June where international think tanks, former representatives of U.S. and international armed forces give letter grades to certain parts of Ukraine's economy and military sector. And June 2025, I want to remind people, was a very tragic year for Ukraine because it had been 3 years into the war, and the Shahed technology that Iran had exported into Russia, Russia had now set up factories with North Koreans producing these at hundreds a day. As of the summer of 2025, Russia had increased the amount of attacks into Ukraine. And if you look all the way towards our summit in June of 2026, the results were radically different because of domestically produced interceptors. Ukraine now has 3 viable interceptors that can intercept whatever Russia is sending as far as unpiloted drone technology. And those are from 3 separate companies, and they are being developed and manufactured at scale to the extent that Ukraine is able to export some of them to countries in the Middle East who are also under threat by Iranian drones. So this is the thing that's radically different. And once we get to the point where Ukraine is doing that with ballistic missiles, that drastically changes the narrative. Because as I said earlier, history in the world, which means it's the largest territory you need to defend. And Russia has not done its job in terms of developing enough air interceptors.
All right, so how united is the West really at this stage of the war, particularly with Ukraine needing more weapons of air defense? But I also want to find out from you, Ukraine, as you said, has targeted Russian infrastructure over time while Moscow continues its strike on Ukrainian sites and infrastructure. But I want to know, where is the line between legitimate military and pressure to escalate this war? Because on one end, there is the need to end the war.
Yes, we see this radical difference between the targets that are being hunted in Ukraine. We notoriously have Russian drones literally going around hunting civilians in their occupied territories or in the gray zone between occupied territories and Ukrainian territory. We also have, as you mentioned, logistic sites in Russia being targeted, and some of those include the company Wildberries. That is the largest private debtor in Russia. They have outlays for many of Russia's financial institutions, and therefore making sure that Ukraine targets those facilities, those warehouses, means that Russia is in danger of its financial institutions not being able to cover its outlays. So there are many reasons for civilian and military targets being attacked. I think the vast difference that you see just in the latest UN report for civilian casualties of July of 2026 lays out pretty clearly where the heinous targeting of innocent civilians is happening. That's on Ukrainian territory, and how disciplined Ukraine has been in targeting both military as well as logistics hubs when you're talking to oil refining, when you're talking to distribution of products such as the Wildberries facilities. Those facilities are the only ones currently being targeted in Russia.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Andriy Dobrinsky, a policy expert at the Center for U.S.-Ukrainian Relations in Kyiv. We really do appreciate your insights on A News.
Thank you.
All right, oil prices fell by more than $1 a barrel on Monday ahead of an expected U.S. announcement on new sanctions against Iran. The drop comes as investors took profits following 2 consecutive weeks of gains. Brent crude dropped 1.3% to around $93 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate fell about 1.4% to nearly $86. Both benchmarks gained more than 5% last week as stalled talks between Washington and Tehran added to concerns over oil supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. All right, after the break, we will discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at those global stories. Syria and Israel have held high-level U.S.-mediated talks in Jordan, focusing on halting Israeli strikes on Syrian territory and reviving negotiations on a security agreement. Damascus is demanding that Israeli forces withdraw to position held before the 8th of December 2024 and that the 1974 disengagement agreement be fully restored. The two sides also discussed ways to prevent tensions between Israel and Turkey from spilling over into Syrian territory. Syrian Foreign Minister Asad al-Shabani said security talks are expected to resume soon. However, he said mistrust between the two sides remain. Iraq and Libya are agreeing to strengthen bilateral ties and expand security cooperation following talks in Baghdad on Sunday. Iraqi Foreign Minister Fuad Hussein said discussions covered regional security, intelligence sharing to tackle terrorism and organized crime, and the economic impact of disruption of the Strait of Hormuz. He also reaffirmed support for Libya's government and political reconciliation. Libya's Foreign Minister Tahir al-Bahou said Tripoli wants closer cooperation with Iraq in oil, healthcare, and education. The two sides are expected to sign several agreements on Monday. Iraq has proposed a joint security council between regional rivals Iran and Saudi Arabia. Baghdad's national security advisor says a crisis of trust is driving tensions between the two powers. The diplomatic push follows recent drone attacks on Saudi's oil facilities, with Riyadh says were launched from Iraqi territory by Iran-affiliated militias. In a response, Iraq said it ordered an investigation and is moving to bring all domestic weapons under state control. Israeli airstrikes continue across Gaza despite a ceasefire. A strike on a building in central Gaza has killed and injured several people, raising fresh concerns over the future of the pause in fighting.
An Israeli airstrike has destroyed a building in Zawaida in the central Gaza Strip. The incident took place on Sunday. Earlier, the Israeli military had warned the building's residents to leave the area. According to Palestinian health officials, 2 separate airstrikes hit the Gaza Strip. At least 2 people, including a 4-year-old boy, were killed and 7 others were injured. Medics said debris and shrapnel were scattered around the area following the explosion. The 4-year-old Mohammed Abdel Salam Taha was later pronounced dead in hospital.
As you can see, they gave a warning to the place and people left it. Our hearts are dead. We are living without feelings and without a soul. Every day we face these things, wherever we face these things. When it comes to us, we're done. There is no ceasefire. There is nothing. There is nothing. Our lives are destroyed, our youth are destroyed. What can we do? We want solutions, we want to live in peace. This does not make sense, this does not make sense. It's true these things are happening to other people, but I am also human. I see these things, people torn into pieces, we die, our morale is destroyed.
The second strike hit the nearby Nuseirat refugee camp. The Israeli military said it was investigating both strikes. The military also said a senior Hamas member, Sharif al-Hasnat, was killed in the city of Deir al-Balah. Israel says he was leading efforts to restore Hamas's underground infrastructure. Hamas has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire. The group also accused Israel of undermining US President Donald Trump's plan to end the Gaza conflict. According to Gaza health officials, more than 1,280 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire took effect last October. The Israeli military says 4 of its soldiers have been killed during the same period.
Now, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Jordanian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi in Beijing on Sunday. Wang said he was confident that Jordanian King Abdullah's visit to China would be a success. China praised Jordan's support for the One China principle and said it would continue to back Jordan's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Beijing also supports Amman's role on the Palestinian issue and other regional matters. Safadi said Jordan wants to deepen cooperation with China and praised Beijing's support for a two-state solution.
将两国元首共识和战略伙伴定位转化为务实行动，深化各领域合作。13号在北京会见陪同阿卜杜拉2世国王访华的约旦副首相兼外交大臣萨法迪。王毅表示，中方赞赏约方坚定奉行对华友好政策，恪守一个中国原则，将继续支持约方维护自身独立、主权和领土完整。中方愿同约方落实好两国元首重要共识，为开辟中约关系下一个50年奠定基础、注入动力。萨法迪表示，约方高度重视对华关系，愿同中方一道将两国元首共识和战略伙伴定位转化为务实行动，深化各领域合作。
Greek authorities have transferred around 240 migrants from the Crete to the islands of Lesbos and Samos. On Sunday, around 220 migrants were taken to Lesbos and another 200 to Samos. Greece's migration ministry said the transfers were to carry out checks and complete border procedures and would be temporary. Authorities said the facilities on these two islands currently had low occupancy after more than 4,700 people were moved to other facilities this year. Crete currently has a temporary migrant facility in China. Work is also continuing on a second facility in Heraklion. Now, at least 30 people have been killed in Guinea after a major rubbish dump collapsed on a residential area in the capital of Conakry. Authorities say heavy rains triggered the landslide early on Sunday, burying multiple homes and tons of waste.
Search and recovery operations are underway in Conakry in Guinea, where authorities say at least 30 people have been killed after a major landfill collapsed. Emergency crews and local volunteers are using bulldozers to clear the debris and locate missing residents. The disaster occurred around 2 a.m. following torrential rain. A large section of the rubbish dump gave way, pushing directly into homes built alongside the site.
At 2 a.m, we were sleeping when we heard a loud noise. The first ones out, there were 4 or 5 people from the family who went out to see what had happened outside. Suddenly, we saw the first break. This time, the second wave came. That is what knocked us over, pushed the house, and it fell.
The Red Cross and civil protection agencies were deployed to coordinate the emergency response. While rescue teams have managed to pull survivors from the wreckage, officials are managing a high number of casualties.
There are around 30 dead. The bodies have been taken to Donka Hospital and we now have 22 injured. What we must be thankful for is that civil protection found many people under the rubble, bringing out 22 people who are truly injured. For the other bodies, the search continues.
The disaster highlights long-standing safety concerns surrounding the open-air dump. Just days before the collapse, Guinea's government announced plans to permanently close the landfill, citing severe risks during the rainy season. Authorities had scheduled the waste to be relocated outside the capital, but the site remained fully operational when the landslide occurred.
EU firefighters have joined efforts to contain a wildfire in Serbia's Diblato sands. Belgrade activated the EU civil protection mechanism on Friday as the blaze continued to spread. The flames have burned thousands of hectares of forest around 80 kilometers from the capital. Serbian authorities say Romania, Slovakia and Czech Republic have sent 4 Black Hawk firefighting helicopters. Germany and Romania are providing a total of 124 firefighters and 39 vehicles. Russia has also joined the operation. President Alexander Vucic said the firefighters had managed to protect people's lives and homes. Now to another quick break. When we return, I'll discuss the key regional headlines. Stay tuned. Welcome back and thank you for staying with me on A News this morning. Now, let's turn to the region. Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan are taking their strategic partnership to a new level as President Ilham Aliyev's state visit to Tashkent brings a new treaty of eternal friendship and fresh plans to boost trade, investment and regional connectivity.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Uzbek President Shavkat Mirziyoyev held talks in Tashkent on Sunday during Aliyev's state visit to Uzbekistan, setting new targets for trade, investment and regional cooperation. The two leaders met at the Kuksaroy state residence following an official welcome ceremony. Speaking at the third meeting of the Supreme Interstate Council, Mirziyoyev said relations between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan had reached a historic high. The two presidents signed a treaty on eternal friendship, further strengthening ties between the two countries. The leaders adopted a roadmap aimed at raising annual bilateral trade to $1 billion. Mirziyoyev said trade between the two countries had tripled over the past 5 years.
At the heart of our relations lies a shared civilizational code, common historical roots, centuries-old friendship, unbreakable spiritual values, and similar culture and traditions. It is this deep-rooted bond that makes our relations solid and invulnerable to external conditions.
They also discussed expanding joint projects, with the current investment portfolio exceeding $5 billion across sectors including energy, industry, construction, agriculture and finance.
Сегодня мы говорим о цели товарооборота в 1 миллиард, как не какой-то.
Today, we speak of the $1 billion trade turnover target, not as a distant dream, but as a goal we will likely reach in a couple of years. Everything discussed today, the reciprocal investment projects in sectors our economies require, would have been impossible if both countries were not advancing along parallel paths.
Было бы невозможно, если бы обе страны не развивались параллельным курсом.
Transport cooperation was also high on the agenda, including plans for a joint Caspian shipping fleet and expanded transit routes. President Aliyev highlighted progress on the Zangezur corridor, saying Azerbaijan's main railway section is expected to be completed next year, while construction is also underway in Nakhchivan. He also invited Mirziyoyev to visit Baku, an invitation the president of Uzbekistan accepted. The visit reflects growing ties between the South Caucasus and Central Asia.
All right, then let's stay on that story for a discussion on President Aliyev's state visit to Uzbekistan. I'm joined by Fuad Karimli, a political analyst from right here in Baku. Hello and welcome back to A News.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So the two sides call this an eternal friendship. What really lies behind this treaty, besides what the two countries already share?
Well, we do see that in terms of the eternal friendship, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan do share a similar civilizational historical ties. So there is a deep-rooted historical tie between the two countries in terms of linguistics, in terms of religion and culture and all of this. But then we see that it's taken to the next level into the modern times with trade turnover increasing and a new strategic alliance between the two countries. So this relationship has developed throughout the independence years of both countries from the USSR. However, we see that in the past few years it has taken on a new form of life, specifically between the two countries.
Mm-hmm. So we've seen that trade has tripled, but some say that the 1 billion target is rather low. Is that ambition keeping the pace of the scale of the political connections between the two sides?
Well, we do see that, like you said, the pace of the trade turnover increasing in the past couple of years has been tripled. So in 1 year's time, it has tripled, which is significant in itself. Yeah. However, we see that a lot of these investments are into infrastructure, energy, banking. So I do think that in terms of the 1 billion benchmark, it is not so ambitious. It can be much more, and it probably will be. It just sets a benchmark that has to be reached, and then anything other than that will be a bonus, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about the joint investment fund of around $500 billion, but only $160 million has been committed. Why is deployment moving slowly in this particular regard?
When we look at specifically the joint investment fund, yes, there has been a target of 500 million. However, it not having been reached doesn't necessarily mean that there hasn't been that kind of investment. It's just that that investment has been in different bilateral fields, so not specifically in that framework. So other investment into infrastructure, into energy sector has been taking place. But I think it also has even exceeded that amount. It's just that within that framework, it hasn't existed until now.
Mm-hmm. So Uzbekistan wants a dedicated Caspian corridor under a single operator. Yep. Looking at that, could that give Baku and Tashkent greater control over the transit routes in particular?
We see that in the past few years there has been an increased attention towards the middle corridor. So specifically Central Asian countries have been wanting an alternative route to Europe for their goods, for their minerals and their other natural resources as well. And with everything that's going on right now in the world, the northern corridor for them and the southern corridor has been problematic in terms of sustainability. Mm-hmm. So with the conflicts that have been going on in Russia and Iran, when we see that Uzbekistan wants this joint project in the Caspian Sea, obviously we know that Uzbekistan is a landlocked country. So it has those kinds of difficulties in reaching the European markets, and I think Azerbaijan is key in terms of facilitating that as well.
Mm-hmm. Now I want to find out from you then, if Zangezur, the corridor, and the Caspian routes converge, could this mean that Azerbaijan becomes indispensable in terms of transit bridge between, Central Asia and Europe?
Well, I think that's the initial plan, right? So when the middle corridor passes through Azerbaijan, it has to have an unhindered transition through Azerbaijan, and the only way for that to happen is through the Zangezur corridor, which is already on its way, and I think a major part of it in Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan will hopefully be completed in the next year. And that also was dependent on the peace process with Armenia, which is progressing significantly. So I think the Zangezur corridor is specifically, when we narrow it down, the most important part for the middle corridor to take place.
Mm-hmm. So I want to find out then, Azerbaijan is now inside the Central Asia Leaders Consultative Meeting. Is this effectively redefining where Central Asia ends and where the South Caucasus then begins?
When we look at the C5, specifically the process that you've been talking about, we see that Azerbaijan has been involved in a very significant way. So Central Asia has always been more detached than the South Caucasus, specifically with the influence of countries like Russia and China. But we see that in the past couple of years, Azerbaijan has been pioneering a way to increase the connectivity. Azerbaijan has shown through its own foreign policy that independent foreign policy can take place in the post-Soviet space. And even the term post-Soviet is already being kind of dated. So we look at the future, we see that the Central Asian countries, in terms of shared ethnic and cultural and religious identity with Azerbaijan and Turkey, there is a specific path that they can take, and they know that Azerbaijan is key in terms of facilitating that as well.
So with Uzbek having $5 billion planned in tourism as an investment and also expanding industrial cooperation, are we seeing then that Azerbaijan becoming an investor in Central Asia rather than simply just like a transit state that allows transit to take place?
Yes, definitely the $5 billion envisaged investment is quite ambitious, and it shows basically what Azerbaijan has planned specifically for the relationship between Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan is like the treaty itself, it's called eternal. So investment in infrastructure like that, it shows that the two countries are really becoming more interconnected. So it's not just superficial trade or having some transport logistics of goods that are taking place, but it shows that Azerbaijan relies on Uzbekistan as a reliable partner, and it sees that in terms of having this high volume of investment is secure.
Now let's look beyond trade. Could Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan eventually build complementary industrial supply chains outside of obviously the trade relations that they do foster?
We see that already Azerbaijan has been taking steps in that direction. So the automotive industry is one part. So Uzbekistan has invested in that in Azerbaijan. I think that's specifically one area that's going to increase. But then energy also is a significant part. We see banking, we see even education is a significant part of the treaty. That caught my attention is that there will be education both in Uzbek and Azerbaijan in the two countries, and systems are going to be integrated, and we see already plans in that direction as well.
That's very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of citizens from both countries would be looking to those benefits. So both sides then also stress and implicitly express, coordination in international organizations. Could this partnership evolve into a coordinated political voice on regional issues with regards to the international organizations?
When looking at international organizations, we see that the voice of our countries has mostly, until now, had been detached, but we now see more of a unity, specifically with Central Asian countries, specifically in issues of security that concerns all of us. We see that the Central Asian countries and Azerbaijan have mostly always been aligned on specific international issues, and we see that Uzbekistan has always been on the side of Azerbaijan in this sense as well.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Fuad Karimli, a political analyst here in Baku. Really do appreciate you coming all the way and taking your time to provide us your insights.
Thank you.
All right, so now Kazakhstan's newly formed pro-government allied party has secured a landslide victory in the country's snap parliamentary election, according to exit polls. The party is reported to have won between 70 to 72% of the vote, strengthening President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev's hold of power. The election was the first under the new constitution, replacing the two House Parliament with a single 145-seat chamber. More than 74% of voters took part. Small opposition parties are also expected to enter Parliament, but they are broadly seen as supporting the president's agenda. All right, that's it for this morning. Thank you for joining me and the Daybreak team behind the scenes. Stay tuned to our streaming platforms on YouTube and the A News website, and also follow us on all our social media pages. Goodbye.